Hello everyone, I'm Tyler Chrestman. Welcome to this week's Chrestman Conversation. So we are going to be covering a topic this week, an article that came out on Tuesday the 3rd on the Guardian's website. Now this is a very long article, so I'm going to be kind of addressing the points rather quickly, and we're going to have to just try and get through it. I made a lot of notes on this article, so we're just going to be briefly touching on all of them. But this article came out on the 3rd. The title of the article, again on the Guardian's website, The Myth of the Free Speech Crisis, and it was by Nesreen Malik. Pardon if that's not the correct pronunciation. It looks like it'd be pronounced that way. This article, I do not agree with at all. It is a prime example of bad faith politics. So this author goes through and attributes negative motives to everyone on the other side of her opinion, and we're going to demonstrate that by going through the article and pointing to all the examples. Again, we're going to move kind of quickly because this is a very long piece in The Guardian, and we're going to just have to address as much of it as we can. So the first two paragraphs, she is talking about how online comments have become more and more polarizing and toxic. I think most people would agree with that. The online political commentary is a dumpster fire. It is not something that you want a piece of. So everyone, I think, would agree with that. It's very obvious that political commentary online is more and more polarizing and toxic lately. Then she kind of tips her hand as to where her political affiliations lie and what this article is going to be about, for the most part. And it's in the last sentence of the second paragraph, I believe. And, quote, "It was becoming harder to discuss almost anything without a virtual snarl in response, and it was becoming harder to do so if one were not white or male," end quote. Again, this is just a tone setter for the piece. It just kind of lets you know where the author's opinion are. The world is a white patriarchy, and this is going to be colored in that lens. This entire piece is going to be against the white patriarchy, and in this case also against the Republican white patriarchy. The next paragraph is her main thesis. This is the important bit of the piece. This paragraph is really the main thrust of her argument, so I'm going to quote it in its entirety so we can go through it. Quote, "The vast majority of this abuse goes unpunished, and yet it is somehow conventional wisdom that free speech is under assault, that university campuses have succumbed to an epidemic of no platforming, that social media mobs are ready to raise their pitchforks at the most innocent slip of the tongue or joke, and that Enlightenment values that protected the right of free expression and individual liberty are under threat. The cause of this, it is claimed, is liberal totalitarianism that is attributed somehow simultaneously to intolerance and thin skin. The impulse is allegedly at once both fascist in its brutal inclinations to silence the individual and protective of the weak, easily wounded and coddled. This is the myth of the free speech crisis. It is an extension of the political correctness myth, but it is a recent mutation, more specifically linked to efforts or impulses to normalize hate speech or shut down legitimate responses to it. The purpose of the myth is not to secure freedom of speech, that is, the right to express one's opinions without censorship, restraint, or legal penalty. The purpose is to secure the license to speak with impunity, not freedom of expression, but rather freedom from consequences of that expression." End quote. Again, notice how she attributes everyone on the other side of being linked to efforts to normalize hate speech and shut down responses to it. Not a good faith argument. But her thesis has basically three main contentions. 1, universities have no issues with free speech or deplatforming. 2, social media mobs are an overblown, over-talked about fringe phenomenon. And 3, the myth of the free speech crisis is an attempt to normalize hate speech and demand freedom from consequence. Now we're going to go through all of these and explain why they are all nonsense. And we're going to start with number 1. Problem 1, that universities have no trouble with free speech. In order to address this, we are going to start with Charles Murray. We're going to just give examples, some high-profile examples. Charles Murray gave a speech at Middlebury. You might not know Charles Murray. Charles Murray is the author of perhaps the most controversial book put out in the last 30 years. He wrote The Bell Curve, for those of you who don't know who he is. He is a very controversial figure. But he gave a speech at Middlebury. The speech itself was disrupted. He was not allowed to speak. Every time he attempted to go to the platform, he was shouted down by people in the audience. After the speech, he and his escort were physically assaulted by students on the campus. They were pushed. His escort had her hair pulled. She suffered an injury to her neck. Then they got in a car. Their car was vandalized. The Atlantic, that bastion of right-wing ideology, The Atlantic, the people who publish Ta-Nehisi Coates, they ran an article at the time entitled "A Violent Attack on Free Speech at Middlebury." I encourage everyone to go and read that article on The Atlantic. Again, a violent attack on free speech at Middlebury, discussing Charles Murray, an academic who was physically assaulted on college campus. In that article, they actually referenced other recent deplatforming incidences. Milo Yiannopoulos was invited to and then deplatformed from Berkeley. Richard Dawkins deplatformed. Bill Maher also deplatformed from Berkeley. Ayaan Hirsi Ali has been deplatformed. Any mainstream right-wing or right-leaning, again, Richard Dawkins isn't right-wing. Bill Maher, obviously not right-wing. But any controversial figure who gets invited to a college campus, there have been pushback on so many that have been deplatformed that we could just go through. We could just spend 40 minutes just listing people. These are some high-profile ones, though. But those are just people who've been deplatformed. What about people who actually don't get uninvited like those, but they go to speak? There is another problem on college campus, which is larger than the no platforming of people, and it is the shouting down of people you do not agree with. This is what happened to Charles Murray. Again, that Atlantic article has a video where you can see exactly what I'm talking about. You could click on it and you can watch Charles Murray attempt to speak, and protesters in the auditorium refuse to let that happen. And this happens to a lot of other prominent figures on college campuses. Christina Hoff Sommers, multiple universities, but there's a great video from Lewis and Clark. Christina Hoff Sommers, a Democrat who just happens to disagree with people on a lot of feminist ideology, shouted down at Lewis and Clark on video. Ben Shapiro, multiple campuses, where he just gets accosted by people in the audience. He gave a speech at Berkeley. It required 100 police officers in riot gear, and when they arrested 9 people, 3 of whom were carrying weapons. Again, a intellectual speaker who can't give a speech on a college campus without 100 police officers in riot gear. Dave Rubin at the University of New Hampshire, another great online video you can see of protesters in an auditorium just refusing to let someone give a speech. Jordan Peterson at Queens campus. People broke windows of the speech hall he was in. They banged on the door. They made people inside fearful for their safety. They chanted, "Lock them in and burn it down." These are just high-profile examples. These are not, and they're not even, I haven't nearly exhausted the list. It goes on and on. These are just a quick Google search can show you a gigantic list of people who have been no platform, people who have been shouted down, people who have been physically assaulted. Michael Knowles got hit with a milkshake. I think that was also at Berkeley. I might be mistaken on the spot, but Michael Knowles hit with a milkshake, and people just find it hilarious. You know, he's giving a speech, and just someone just throws things at him. It's not okay. And taking aside the anecdotal, taking aside just all of these really high-profile examples you can give, Brett Weinstein at Evergreen, you can also just look at data on college campuses and among adults. A Pew poll found that 40% of millennials, college-age people, 40% of millennials favor censoring offensive speech compared to 24% of boomers and Gen Xers. So not quite doubled, but almost double the amount of people who think that you should censor offensive speech compared with older people to younger people. Younger people, the college campus age people, think 40% of them at least that you should censor offensive speech. A Cato 2017 Free Speech and Tolerance survey of U.S. adults found that 71% of Americans believe political correctness has silenced important discussions our society needs to have. 71% of people feel as though the climate around speech is so heated that it is silencing debate. 58% of Americans believe political climate prevents them from sharing their own political beliefs. That's 53%. 53% of Democrats don't feel that way, but 47% do feel that way. while Republicans, 73% of them, and independents, 58, say they keep their political beliefs to themselves for fear of backlash. 73% of Republicans, 58% of independents, 47% of Democrats feel as though they can't even discuss their political beliefs due to fear of backlash. And she believes that it's overblown. Again, just a ridiculous statement. It has the idea she puts forth that there's no problem on college campuses. It comes from either a place of complete ignorance on the subject, someone who has never listened to a conservative speaker in their life, or she's just choosing to ignore them to make a point. It's one or the other. I don't know which. I'm not going to, just say she's actively ignoring it, but it's either ignorance or just a lie. Problem 2 that she points to. Social media moms are an overblown phenomenon. I don't know how anyone could believe this in 2019. Let's jump all the way back to January of this year, all those many months ago. Does anyone remember the Covington Catholic high school kids? Anyone remember them and the protest and the backlash against these kids? This was, for those of you who don't remember, the Covington Catholic high school boys were at the National Mall, and a video was released where a Native American protester was standing in the face of this young man wearing a MAGA hat. All the Covington Catholic kids had a MAGA hat, and a Native American protester was there beating a drum in the face of a kid who just happened to be smiling and just standing there. Those kids were viciously attacked online. They were wearing MAGA hats. Everyone immediately jumped to a line of conclusions. Those kids were smeared up and down. They were doxxed by members of the media. Personal information, contact information released by members of the media. They were the center of countless opinion pieces, blog posts, Facebook, Twitter things online. They were harassed online, Facebook, Twitter. You had blue checkmark people like Reza Aslan saying things like, quote, "Have you ever seen a more punchable face?" about a 16-year-old high school kid. Their parents received death threats in the mail about these kids. The idea that social media is not a toxic whirlpool that can suck you down in an instant is ridiculous. Now, let's ignore for a second that the entire premise of this outrage was a hoax, that the controversy around these kids was manufactured, that I think his name was Nathan Phillips. Nathan Phillips, the Native American activist, straight up lied about what happened in that incident, and then video came out later that disproved it, and that those kids were actually the ones getting taunted by the black Israelites across the National Mall from them. Let's ignore all of this for a second and just look at actually what happened to the kids themselves. Countless episodes of harassment to these kids. And this is just one example of a regular person, a kid like the kid in the center of the video. How many times he was on the news, how many times he was asked about this incident, how many people just said nasty, vicious things about this young man. Again, just a regular person who got on video, not even saying anything, just standing in a video. Some guy walked across the National Mall into his face, beating a drum. He stood there. He said, "I just smiled because I didn't know what to do. It was incredibly uncomfortable." And life just attacked nonstop. Again, just one example. Mario Lopez. Ask Mario Lopez, the guy from E! News. Ask him what it's like to voice an opinion online these days. It isn't that people will disagree with you, which is fine. Disagreement is a good thing. The ability to talk and discuss ideas, these are good things. It isn't that people disagree with you online when you voice an opinion. It is that they try and ruin your life. They tried to get Mario Lopez, his show, canceled. They tried to ostracize him from society for voicing an opinion about transgender 3-year-olds. Again, it's a controversial subject to discuss. Maybe if you're Mario Lopez, you're better off avoiding it. But again, why is that? It's because you know that the people who are on the other side of the issue are not going to be reasonable. They are going to destroy your life. Again, they try to cancel your show. They try and do all these different things because you voice a different opinion. Mario Lopez is not a hate monger. Mario Lopez is not a bigot. Mario Lopez said, hey, maybe we shouldn't give children hormone blockers. And people acted like he advocated for putting people in concentration camps. They, again, not disagreeing with him, wanting to ruin his life. Why is it that Kevin Hart didn't get to host the Oscars? Why is it that James Gunn got fired from Guardians of the Galaxy 3? It's because people are outraged online. They try and ruin people's lives because of a joke, right? Again, distasteful jokes. You know, Kevin Hart, whatever it was, 9 years ago, making some homophobic jokes. Okay, I get it. Jokes can be offensive. I've made plenty of offensive jokes in my life. I like Anthony Jeselnik. He is super offensive. I get it. Offensive jokes can be funny. Sometimes they're distasteful, and sometimes you suffer some consequences for it. But again, there's a difference between people saying, oh, wow, that joke is kind of distasteful, and digging up old things from your past to manufacture outrage to ruin your life. That's what happened to Kevin Hart. Kevin Hart said homophobic things 9 years ago. People said he shouldn't host the Oscar. Look at this tweet from 9 years ago, and I'm so mad about it. No, you're not. It is manufactured outrage to display how woke you are on social media. That faux outrage is not good. But it does ruin people's life. Mario Lopez caught up in the whirlpool. You know, she mentions that social media moms grabbing their pitchforks. That is what it feels like when you're at the center of this. When you say something that doesn't go along the orthodoxy of thought on the left, you will be canceled. Your life will be ruined. It can happen. Ask, what's her name? Justine Sacco. Ask Justine Sacco how quickly your life can change. For those of you who don't remember, she made a terrible online joke. Again, just not a good joke. I understand it. Just, you know, trying to be funny, say something controversial. But it's not a great joke. She said something along the lines of, I'm going to Africa. Hope I don't get AIDS. JK, I'm white. It's like, okay, not a good joke. Maybe a little racist. She had like 200 Twitter followers, but somebody saw it. Somebody sent it to somebody else. It blew up. By the time her plane lands in Africa, her life was over. She had been fired from her job. She had been tarred and feathered because, however long it takes you to fly from New York to Africa, her life was over. And she never knew. She just landed, and then boom, all of a sudden, everyone in the world thinks it has your picture up in memes saying you're a racist, your job has been contacted, you've been fired. This is how it can happen. And this isn't asking for freedom from consequence. If you say something racist online, yes, you should be held accountable. It's not, you shouldn't say racist things. I think we can all agree on that. However, again, it's the difference is that there's a difference between saying something bigoted and doxing people for political beliefs, which is what Joaquin Castro did. If we all forget about that, saying these people voted for Trump, here's all their personal information, boycott their businesses, ruin their lives, and then starting a campaign against people. There is a difference in that. I don't think we should persecute people for jokes. I don't think that. I think if you make a bad joke, people can say, oh man, that's a little distasteful. Again, I've been there. I say I like offensive jokes. I get it. I understand why people do it. But I also realize that people are going to get offended by that, and it doesn't bother me if I say that. But again, if I made a flat out racist joke, I wouldn't expect no consequences. People shouldn't expect no consequences from their actions. What I'm saying is you shouldn't try and ruin someone's life over a joke, which is what happens online. Again, Kevin Hart doesn't host the Oscars because of a Twitter joke. James Gunn gets fired from a gigantic movie because of a Twitter joke. It's like the idea that social media mobs don't exist. I don't know how you could honestly believe that that's the case. We have examples every single day of some random person going viral because of some stupid thing that they said or did, and then their life is effectively over. And again, sometimes maybe it's deserved. Maybe you do something terrible. Sometimes you make a poor joke, you get on a plane to Africa, and you land, and you are the world's pariah. You trend worldwide on Twitter for a bad joke that you maybe made at the time, she said she was drinking and doing Ambien, right? So you're drinking, you're doing Ambien. You make it what you think is a controversial joke. You might not be a racist. You might just say something, like that's a little racist, because sometimes people laugh at that. And then you get on a plane and your life's ruined when you land. Now that's a social media mob. That is the effect that the mob has on regular people. Those of you who might be on the fence, Quillette had a really awesome article called "I Was the Mob Until the Mob Came for Me." Go ahead, Google that, check it out. I might include a link in the video on a couple of these articles I mentioned, but it's a good one. Again, just a nonsensical point. The social media mobs are overblown. Yeah, Twitter, and YouTube right now is being sued by PragerU for censoring conservative videos online. Now, we haven't even gone into tech giants, but Facebook and Google are in some serious trouble. I don't think YouTube is going to win their lawsuit against PragerU. They're going to pay some money. But right now, if you go online, just look up shadow banning. Look up anything. Look up how many prominent conservatives are kicked off Twitter for controversial things that they say, and then tell me that there isn't censoring going on from social media platforms. Tell me that there isn't social media mobbing that exists to drum up outrage against political opponents. It's a crazy claim. It really is. We're going to address, again, we got a lot to go over here. Point 3. And this is my least favorite point of her entire article, because it's the one where she just wants to castigate all her opponents as racist and bigots. The next point is that the free speech crisis is an attempt to normalize hate speech, or at least demand that you have no consequences from it. So firstly, the term hate speech has no legal definition. It is not a segment of speech recognized by law. There is no such thing as hate speech in the United States. You cannot be prosecuted for hate speech. It doesn't exist. It is not a real thing. So when people say like hate speech isn't protected by the First Amendment, you have no idea what you're talking about. That's just not true. It's never been the case. She cites in there a bunch of different ways in which freedom of speech in the United States is curtailed, and then fails to realize that every single way is because it harms other people. You aren't allowed to call for violence against other people, and you aren't allowed to slander or libel other people because it harms other people. Hate speech doesn't harm other people. If you make a statement that is bigoted, it's offensive, it's distasteful, but it's not incitement. And that is a big, big difference that people fail to understand. We're going to keep going. Firstly, hate speech, not a real term. Second, her article it goes on at a certain point to talk about the new atheists. She mentions Richard Dawkins specifically. And she says, quote, "I spotted argumentative technicalities, e.g. Islam is not a race, to hide rank prejudice and Islamophobia," end quote. Here we go. There it is. She is referring to Dawkins in this, or had just mentioned Dawkins, but I am absolutely positive she would include people like Sam Harris, Majid Nawaz, Ayaan Hirsi Ali under the same labels as prejudiced Islamophobes. So Majid Nawaz just won $3 million from the Southern Poverty Law Center for similar libel. What she does here is ridiculous, where she says everyone who doesn't agree with me is an Islamophobe, and she uses Islam is not a race as an example. Well, I hate to tell her this. Islam really is not a race. It's not, and that's not used to disguise Islamophobia or prejudice. That's used to make a point that you can't be racist against Islam. Islamophobia as a term is just nonsensical. If you're bigoted against Muslims, that's not good. But to talk like Sam Harris talking about Islam. He wrote a book with Majid Nawaz called Islam and the Future of Tolerance. Read that book and then tell me that Sam Harris is a bigot against Muslims. The entire book is about empowering segments of the Muslim population to help the problem of extremism. But this is a slight digression. My entire point is that she wants to call everyone who doesn't agree with her a prejudiced Islamophobe or a racist or a bigot, and she does it out in the open right there with Richard Dawkins. Overall, this entire article is incredibly hypocritical. Her main 3 points are unfounded, easily disproved. But my favorite part of the article comes at the end. My favorite part is the second to last paragraph, where she just comes right out and says what she was hinting at the entire time in the article. And this is the quote. Quote, "We challenge the instrumentalization by reclaiming the true meaning of the freedom of speech, which is freedom to speak rather than a right to speak without consequence. Challenging hate speech more forcefully, being unafraid to contemplate banning and no platforming those we think are harmful to the public good, and being tolerant of objection to them when they do speak." End quote. Okay. The entire article that you just wrote, and this is a very long piece, the entire article you just wrote, I thought the point was to say that the free speech myth doesn't exist. It's a myth, right? The free speech crisis is a myth. And then you come out and you actively make the point that the opposite side said. Hey, other people want to silence your opinion. That is what people say about free speech in the United States. And then you come right out and say it. You say we should be unafraid to contemplate banning and no platforming those we think are harmful to the public good. There's the important caveat right there. Harmful to the public good. Well, forgive me. You just said Richard Dawkins is an Islamophobe and a bigot. He is prejudiced. Forgive me if I don't trust you to determine who's harmful to the public good. I don't agree with your assessment of the situation. So why then do you get to no platform people? Why do you get to ban people from speaking? What is that about? How come you think you know better than me who gets to speak and who doesn't? Because I'll tell you, I have a very simple, a very consistent point on freedom of speech. You should be able to say whatever you want. That's not a call for freedom from consequence. You have to own what you say. But you should be able to say whatever you want, provided that it does not cause injury to another person. No incitement. You can't say, I'm going to punch you. Or you can't say, hey, John, you should go punch him. That is incitement. That is a very clear standard. If I say something bigoted, prejudiced, if I say something tough on immigration or against affirmative action, you can't then just say that's incitement. That's not incitement. It does not work that way. It does not work where I say something politically charged and then you claim incitement and that I am advocating violence. That is a terrible, terrible thought process. It does not work. So this is the entire point. She comes right out and says what she's arguing the whole time, which is that she's arguing against, she says the free speech crisis is a myth. Then she just comes right out and says the exact opposite point, which is that we should contemplate banning no platforming those we think. She says that the Overton window is expanding, but she doesn't even realize she's in the group that is shrinking the Overton window. She wants to make the Overton window smaller and then declare everyone outside of it an extremist and a bigot, and then say those people don't deserve to speak. This is what people on the other side of the argument are afraid of. The thing that you're openly calling for and saying is made up. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. Her opinion does not make any sense. She ends the article by saying, a moral right to express unpopular opinions is not a moral right to express those opinions in a way that silences the voices of others or puts them in danger of violence. End quote. Hypocrisy. It knows no bounds, apparently. Her hypocrisy is unreal. The amount of cognitive dissonance it requires to write this article is unfathomable. How can you say that the free speech crisis is a myth and then call for no platforming and banning people who you disagree with? Again, she'll say it's because they're trying to normalize hate speech. But if you're going to use as your big example Richard Dawkins as a hate monger, congratulations. You have no credibility with me. Why should I trust your opinion on anything else? Why should I cede the ability to regulate speech to you and your opinions? I don't agree with your opinions. Why should you use your freedom of speech to silence anyone else? You're going to no platform people you disagree with. That is what everyone's afraid of. You're going to ban people. Steve Bannon, who I don't like. Again, this is a personal opinion. I don't like him, but I will defend his right to speak. He got invited to a conference, the New Yorker conference, I believe, and they almost canceled the entire thing because everyone refused to even show up to talk to him. Again, you don't have to like Steve Bannon, but if you think the man doesn't have something to say, you're out of your mind. Listen to your political opponents. Listen to what they're saying so you know the arguments on the other side and you know how to argue against them. If you think not showing up, Steve Bannon not showing up to a conference is good because he has nothing to add to the political discussion, you're out of your mind. The guy was instrumental in getting Donald Trump elected to the presidency. You think he doesn't have something to say about politics? You think he doesn't have... You might hate everything that comes out of his mouth, but it's good to know what comes out of his mouth. It's good to hear these things. You should know what your political opponents are talking about. You should not know platform people. If I get invited to speak on a college campus, you should... Anyone gets invited to speak on a college campus by a group of students, that person should speak. If they can raise the money to rent the auditorium, if the speaker agrees to come, if they have the money to pay whatever speaking fee that might be charged, if they can organize an event, then you don't get to show up and shut down that event. You don't get to show up and stand up in the middle of the auditorium with an air horn and shut down the speaker. You don't get to use, again, your freedom of speech to silence anyone else's freedom of speech. That's not how freedom of speech works. My freedom of speech doesn't mean I get to talk over you. So if you're there giving a speech and I stand up and I start chanting and yelling and I don't let you talk, that's not a good protest. A good protest would be standing outside with a sign, a flyer, engaging people in debate, not silencing others with your voice, which is what this woman wants you to do. She wants you to no platform people. Don't let them talk because they're harmful to the public good. Sorry, I don't think you get to make that decision. I don't get to make that decision. I don't get to decide who's harmful to the public good. Neither do you. Basically, this entire article reads like that. It's someone who has absolutely no clue as to what goes on campuses specifically. When you can just look at videos. Just look at them all day. You just spend a day researching what happened to Jordan Peterson at the University of Toronto, or Brett Weinstein at Evergreen, Charles Murray, Middlebury, any of these people. Just look up what is going on and how people treat people they disagree with. You treat people you disagree with as though they have nothing of value to add to the conversation. And you wind up in a situation like this. Anyway, I encourage everyone to go read the article, make your own opinions. Because I read it and I just was thinking to myself, man, this person has no idea what they're talking about the entire time. And then you get to those last paragraphs and you're like, oh, perfect. This is exactly the point that you're arguing against. It does not make any sense. Anyway, go check it out. It's a pretty good one to get you, upset for the day. We're going to move on though. I had a lot of questions from last week. We don't have a lot of time to address all of them, but, we're going to try and address some of them. So this question is, the first question. If the deficit is the main issue, why has it exploded under Trump? It's an excellent question. I briefly touched on this last podcast, I believe. But Donald Trump, any Republican in office who is worth their salt, should be advocating about cutting spending. So Donald Trump cut taxes, which is half of what Republicans want to do. Cut taxes. It's a good thing. We took in more revenue because of that. Going back to the Laffer curve, we actually took in more revenue after we cut taxes than we did before we cut taxes. The problem is the deficit got bigger anyway. Why is this? It's not because of the tax cuts. What it is because spending continues to grow and grow and grow, and nobody is doing anything about it. We are spending our way into oblivion, and nobody's doing anything about it. So the deficit gets bigger. If you look at the history of the deficit in the U.S., it absolutely exploded under Obama and then just continued to explode under Trump. It is just getting bigger at what should be an alarming rate to people. And most people, I feel like, just don't pay any attention to it. So that's why the deficit should be the main issue for Republicans, but even Republicans do not target spending the way that they should. An excellent question, by the way. So what should we do? This is question number 2. What should we do if there is no one who represents my views? First of all, I'd like to say we're starting a club, because there's a lot of us out there. People who identify as independent anymore goes up and up and up, because I am exactly like the person who asked this question. I am very socially liberal, and I'm very fiscally conservative. So I wind up in this weird spot where I listen to Democrats and I say, social issues, yeah, absolutely, I'm all for it. And then they start talking about, their economic plans, and I say, oh God, I can't vote for any of this. It just goes against what I think is reasonable. And then I look at Republicans and I say, well, yeah, even though they often fail to implement their plans, at least when they're fiscally, they're talking finances, they sound fiscally sound, in theory. And then you listen to them on social issues, and I say, I don't necessarily agree with you on a lot of social issues. I don't like a lot of the rhetoric that comes out of Republican politicians often. I find that the unfortunate fact is that occasionally it gets a bit xenophobic and racist, which is not something I would be able to endorse. It's obviously not good ideologies, and occasionally people, again, rhetoric is important in politics. The way that you speak about things should be clear. So I don't like that. So we wind up in this weird thing where, 2020 is going to come around, and I'm going to look at a binary choice on the ballot, and I'm not going to know where to go. And that is a fantastic question. What should you do in that situation? And the answer, unfortunately for me, is I don't know. I don't have a great answer for you. You have to vote with your conscience. I think at this point, and this is going to be a controversial opinion, I do not like Donald Trump. I think that he is unworthy of the office of the presidency. That being said, I think, and this is the controversial bit, I think that some of these Democratic candidates running for president would be more harmful to the country than Donald Trump. Not because they're worse people. I don't think that is the case. But because their actual policies that they might implement would be more harmful than anything Donald Trump has done in office. I think Donald Trump is ineffectual as president, and one of the best things about his presidency has been the fact that our system of government appears to be working. Checks and balances appear to work. They check his worst impulses at the door. Some of the Democrats, if they got into office and they wind up getting a majority, which could be a likely scenario in Congress, then all of a sudden you're going to see policies passed that are going to be more harmful. So when I look at that binary choice at the top of the ticket in 2020, when I have to look at Donald Trump versus fill in the blank, I might have to vote for the Libertarian Party, because I don't think either of these people will be worthy of my vote. And it's an unfortunate spot to be. I wish we had a viable third party. It is unfortunate that we don't, because I think the binary politics, you look at the last election, the two best people we could find were Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. That's sad. And we're going to wind up there again. We're going to wind up with Donald Trump versus someone, and then everyone's going to look at that person and go, that's the best we could do? Who is the standout in the Democratic field right now? It is difficult. It is a difficult question. And it's a hard one. I wish I had the answer to that, because I am in the exact same boat. I do not know what I'm going to do in 2020, and it is a sad, sad place to be. All right. Well, we're hitting around the 40-minute mark on the podcast. I've done enough ranting. I hope we covered that article well enough. I just wanted to address some of the major points. It is a long article, and I can rant and rant and rant, but I don't want this to be a 5-hour podcast. So we're going to leave it there. I think the book of the week, I had mentioned it earlier in the podcast, so I think I'll make that the book recommendation for the week. Islam and the Future of Tolerance by Sam Harris. Again, this is an important book. It's a short book. You can read it in one sitting, which I think was part of the the design of the book is to be accessible. But it is important because what you realize when you read that book is that the person who wrote this article would more than likely castigate someone like Sam Harris as a bigot and an Islamophobe, because Sam Harris is someone who has used that argument that she cites, Islam is not a race, as a way to distinguish himself as not a racist. I'm not a racist, not an Islamophobe. Islam is not a race. I'm not bigoted against Muslims as people. These kind of things. Like, we have to talk about ideas, which is 100% true. We should talk about ideas and polling data. And this is a reasonable person. She would say he's an Islamophobe, and no doubt would be okay with someone attempting to ban or no platform him. So, Islam and the Future of Tolerance by Sam Harris and Majid Nawaz. It is a fantastic little book. I think you will enjoy it. I believe we're going to leave it there for the week. I don't have any special big announcements or anything. This was a kind of an interesting podcast because we did just go over a single article on The Guardian. But again, go check it out, read it, make your own opinions, try and go read some of the articles I cited in this podcast. Maybe watch some of the videos that are linked to in those articles of the specific instances I'm talking about. You'll see that the person who wrote this article just has no idea what they're talking about. And that is unfortunate because this is a major news outlet publishing a large article that just from the other side of the aisle appears completely unfounded. All right. We're going to leave it there for the week. I hope everyone out there has a fantastic week. This is Tyler Chrestman. You take care.